Thank you. Okay, sponsorships. DJ Acquisitions in honor of the Refuah Shlema of Menachem Mendel ben Sarah Batya. This class specifically is sponsored by Moshe and Anna Gorin in memory of Moshe's grandmother Chayaleah Bat Meir, and for the Refuah Shlema of Menachem Mendel ben Sarah Batya and Vorafega Bat Rezel. Tonight's learning is sponsored by Nathan Nathanov for the yurtzeit of Uriel ben Leah Zichrona Lebracha, and Yibod L'chaim Tim Aruchim for the Refuah Shlema of Yeshua Meir ben Leah Sarah, Menachem Mendel ben Sarah Batya, and the Vorafega Bat Rezel. Announcement: next week there won't be learning there will be learning here because Jews are going to be learning here Shavuos night, but there won't be the Lighthouse Project learning because of Shavuot. So Chag Sameach, everyone, may you all receive the Torah with happiness and internalization. Okay. So, there's a huge difference between when your family doctor tells you, for example, that your child or someone has a vitamin deficiency and that you need to add vegetables and vitamins to his or her diet, then if the doctor tells you, God forbid, that you have high cholesterol and cholesterol plaque build up in your arteries, there's a big difference. What's the difference? One demands only to introduce more goodness, more healthy stuff, more good stuff, while the other speaks of a pre-existing negative situation in our lives which demands the work of transformation through strict diet and vigorous exercise. Shalom.
Small class, huh? It's good, better.
Yep.
Avrohom, nice to meet you.
Aleichem shalom. Shalom, how are you? We're going to see
nice
you.
and sorry.
I'm sorry.
It's okay, okay.
My loss. It's Master Moshe. So, basically, we started the class and we're talking about the difference between if a doctor tells you, your family doctor tells you that your child has a vitamin deficiency or you have a vitamin deficiency, and then what you need to do is just introduce more positive stuff, more vegetables, more vitamins, versus if the doctor, God forbid, says that you have high cholesterol buildup in your arteries. Now we're talking about a pre-existing condition, a negative situation, which what we need here now is a strenuous work to transform the negative situation that's a lot harder. And so it is spiritually as well. However, before I speak to you about religious spirituality, I want to talk to you about moral spirituality, that of good character versus character defects. There's a difference. If what you need to do is to keep on polishing and working and strengthening and developing your good characteristics, versus if we have a character defect, a pre-existing character defect. And now you got to go and deal with that negativity, and you have to work really hard to turn that around. Again, the first situation is to introduce more goodness into your life. That's not as hard as dealing with a pre-existing negativity. Someone has to go to anger management is not the same as someone working out. He has a kind nature, he just wants to develop it more. Two different worlds, okay? Now we can speak of religious spirituality. So religious spirituality, the Torah tells us that Torah study and commandment observance brings light into our life. That's what it tells us. It brings blessings into our life. Now, when we feel that we're lacking of blessings, what do? The average thing the Jew immediately does is start adding on in Torah study, start adding on in mitzvah observance, adding on light, adding on goodness. However, there are times that we aren't merely suffering from the absence of blessings in our life. Rather, we are dealing with the reality of true darkness and negativity in our lives. And now it's not enough just to introduce more Torah study, more blessings of commandments. Now we need to somehow really work hard on transforming whatever negativity is in our lives. Okay? Let's talk about it from the Torah perspective. Shalom. Last week, what did we have in the Torah portion? In the second Torah portion, we spoke about it last week. We gave a class. If you'll walk in my statutes, right? I'll give you rains. I'll give you blessings. Pretty easy. God tells you, do what I want you to do, and you'll be opening yourselves up for my blessings. If you feel that you're lacking in blessings, open up more to these stuff. However, what does he say after that? Then God goes on to say, and if you will, and I want to read to you the verse, because it's not just if you won't do my commandments. There's something negative here. And if you despise my statutes and reject my ordinance. There's a negative situation here.
What is the word? Carry?
Huh?
What is the word you're talking about? Carry?
I'm talking about in the despise. That's an action. You're talking about rejecting. We're soon going to see. That's not like, well, I wish I could go to class. I'm just too lazy. Oh, I wish I could put on phone every morning. I just, by the time I get out of bed, I'm running. I'm just too tired. That's a lot different than, no way, I don't put that stuff on. I don't go to shul. I don't do, I can't stand that stuff. That's a different story. So what does he say here? I will order upon you shock, consumption, fever, and disease that cause hopeless longing and depression. He says, I will set my attention against you. We're not talking about the absence of blessing here. We're talking about God says, and I will set upon you. I'm going to actively do negative things. So we're not no more talking about a vitamin deficiency and you need to just take more vitamins. We're not talking about a lack of blessing and just do more Torah and mitzvot. We're talking about a total different situation here. We're talking about an actual darkness and negativity that's taking place. Okay? Now, there's a difference, like I said, there's a difference between not doing God's commandments because of laziness. I'll share with you a story. My grandfather, of blessed memory, both my grandfathers, of blessed memory, they come from a group of Hasidim called Gur. Hasidic Gur. Here they call it Ger, in Israel they call it Gur. They lost the most in the Holocaust. They were in Parsha, they were in the big Hasidic dynasty in Poland. So he told me that one time, one of the Ger Rebbes was walking down the street, and he sees a Jew over there sitting in a non-kosher restaurant. And the guy's eating. And the rabbi's just looking at him. The Ger Rebbe is just looking at him and looking at him. And then the Ger Rebbe tells him, "Agiten appetit." So the guy tells the Ger Rebbe, "Rebbe, I don't think you want to wish me agiten appetit. This what I'm eating here is not kosher." And the Ger Rebbe said, I know it's not kosher. That's why I'm wishing you agiten appetit. And he asked his Rebbe, why? He said, because sometimes you do a sin because of temptation. Sometimes you do a sin with animosity, with anger towards God. I'm wishing you a good appetit. If you're going to eat this, I want to know that you have nothing against God. You got no fight, no bones to pick with him. You just like shrimp. Well, okay, that's a different story. But when there's an act and negativity of rebelling, of despising, God doesn't say, I'm not going to give you my blessings. You didn't earn it, you're not going to get it. No. He's saying something much deeper than that. Okay? Two different things. Thus, why am I giving you all these introductions here as an input to this class, to getting into the class, is because what we see here is, and we're going to discuss this, there's a darkness which is the absence of light. That's all it is. I haven't developed my good characteristic traits. I'm not taking enough vitamins. I'm not doing enough Torah mitzvot. That's a darkness which is the absence of light. And the answer to that is, introduce more life into your life. What happens when there's a darkness which isn't the absence of light? It is actually a something called darkness. That's two different situations. This lecture, we're going to focus on the latter. This lecture, we're going to discuss how to take that darkness, which is not just the absence of light, and specifically that darkness we're going to transform into the highest infinite light. So you understand the introduction, what's going on here. on a health level, on a characteristic level, and on a religious level. The difference between it's dark in my life because I'm not bringing light into my life, or the darkness of life because I'm dealing with negativity. I have anger issues, I have whatever it is, health issues. It's not just a lack of, there's something negative here. That's a different ball of wax. That, we're going to see, leads us even into a greater infinite light than light itself. Let's talk about this, okay? Okay, so, let's talk about darkness. There's a big question in Hasidus. We talk about two opinions. In Kabbalah, we talk about two opinions. We talk about whether darkness is just the absence of light, or darkness is a creation. Now, if you go to Genesis, what does it say in the opening of Genesis? It says that before God created heaven and earth, what was there? Tohu, Vabahu, Vachoshech, Apnei Atahom. Before God created anything, there was darkness. What does it say right after that in the next verse? Vayomer Hashem Yehi Or. And God said, let there be light. Now, if you read those verses, it doesn't say anywhere that God created something called darkness. What we're hearing here is that before God created light, the absence of light equals darkness. Based on this understanding, what do we know? A famous saying: you don't chase out darkness with a broom. You turn on the light. Light dispels darkness. So don't deal with darkness, deal with light. And the minute you have light, it dispels darkness. Because darkness is nothing but the absence of light. Okay, let's look at a different source. What do we say in our prayers every single morning? The Shema Yisrael has two blessings that you have to say before the Shema Yisrael. How does blessing number one start? Baruch atah Hashem, right? Blessed are you. Yotzer or uvorech choshech. You formed light and you created darkness. Uvorech choshech. Wow, a different opinion. Darkness was created. Let me take it to you a little deeper than that. Not only are we saying that darkness was created, but we're saying that darkness is greater than light. Why so? The word formed, yotzer, what does that mean? Formed means that it is a something, and I reformed that something into a different something, right? You have water, you turn it into ice. You have water, you turn it into steam, whatever it is. But you started with a something. What does the word created mean? The Ramban, not the Rambam. They both had very similar lives, but the Ramban, Rav Moshe Nachmanides, he writes in Genesis on the second word of the Torah, Bereshis bara, he says in the entire Hebrew language there's only one word which denotes creation ex nihilo, something out of nothing. And what is that? The word bara. Now, why is it so important to know that? Because the word in the Torah and the sages, you have very different terminologies which we associate with the word and God created. But it isn't so. This God formed, this God acquired, Koneh Shemayim Va'aretz, Yotzer Or. But the word bara, ex nihilo, creating something out of nothing, is a power that exists only within God. Even the infinite light starts with light. We'll talk about that soon. So what are we saying here? We're saying here that darkness is the original infinite power of God to create something out of nothing. Then after that something is created, you have a formation of a something into something else called light. So what is the real omnipotence of God? It expresses itself in the creating of darkness more than in the formation of light.
60%.
It's unbelievable. Interesting enough, on a side note, it's interesting now that science is starting to realize that the deepest DNA of the universe is actually dark matter, upon which light was introduced. Very interesting. So over here, we're not saying that darkness is a nothingness. Darkness is a something. We're even saying that darkness is a greater something than light. Interesting here. Another opinion. Let's talk about another introduction. This week's Torah portion is the Torah portion of Bamidbar. And Bamidbar primarily talks about how does it start? God counted the Jewish people. Now, because the Torah portion speaks of God's taking a census, God commands Moses to count the Jewish people. Therefore, our sages instituted that the Haftorah that we read from the book of prophets and scriptures after the Torah portion comes from Isaiah. Why do we pick that portion? So let me read to you the first verse of that Haftorah. And the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which shall neither be measured nor counted. That is the opening verse of the Haftorah. You see the connection right away, counting. But listen to the verse. And the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which shall neither be measured nor counted. Now, many just defer the choice of wording of our prophets as poetic ruse. Not so in Kabbalah and Chassidus. In Kabbalah and Chassidus, the precise wording of the prophecy is very deep. So now that we know that this is not poetic ruse of a beginning and an end of a verse, phase 1, phase 2, we're now going to talk about a very interesting question here. There's a paradox in this verse. Let's read it. The first thing he says is that there is a number. The Jews are countable, albeit a very mass number, as the sands of the sea, but that's a number. Eventually we'll have a computer that can actually count the numbers of the sands of the sea. That is a countable number. But what does he say right after that? Right after that he says, no, we're not countable. We're not measurable. Make up your mind, Isaiah. Are we a vast number? Or are we just simply infinite, uncountable? We need to understand the paradox of this verse. Now let me share with you. In Kabbalah and Chassidus, how do we take care of a paradox? In Kabbalah and Chassidus, we don't take care of a paradox by negating one side. By Kabbalah and Chassidus, the way we deal with a paradox is we go to beyond the naked eye of the mind, wherein a paradox coexists. So we have to go to another realm beyond the naked eye, because in the naked eye, make up your mind, Isaiah. Countable or not countable? But we're now going to go ahead and learn that in the ultimate truism of which the prophet is talking about, beyond the naked eye and conventional wisdom, this paradox coexists. There is the countable and the uncountable together within the Jewish people, and that's what Isaiah is talking about. Let's understand this. Okay? One last introduction. This last introduction is to understand exactly what happened 3,329 years ago. We are now in the year 5777. In the year 2448, the Jewish people left Egypt, and 50 days later they stood at the foot of Mount Sinai and received the Torah. Now, on a mystical level, what took place? Practically speaking, we know. Practically speaking, the Talmud, the Rambam tells us that the job of studying Torah is in order to know what to do and what not to do. And he goes on to explain that the Torah is the ultimate constitution of humanity and morality. Every mitzvah is here to make a mensch out of us. Let's talk about from a Kabbalistic and Hasidic point of view. Mystically speaking, what took place on this day? So to understand this, we need to go back into creation. There's something very unique. There's an alteration in the terminology of the verses in Genesis. It says 6 times, the verse says, after each day, and it was evening and it was morning, day number 1. It was evening, it was morning, day number 2, right? That's the way it goes on. Yet, something changes on the 6th day. By the way, that affects our Kiddush. I'll share you just a side note in a moment. You know what's the opening words of Kiddush Friday night? Yom Hashishi Vayechulu Hashamayim. That does not make sense. The word Yom Hashishi belongs to the previous verse. It was the evening and the morning, day 6. The next verse starts, Vayechulu Hashamayim Va'aretz. That's on the 7th day. God finished. So by the way, you should just know that because the verse changes, it doesn't say day 6, it says day the 6th. We now use those words together even though they don't make sense. You know why, Moshe? Because we spell out God's name. Yom Yud Hashishi Hey Vayechulu Vav. Right? Hashemayim Hey. But let's go back here. Why did the verse change? It never said the 1, the 2, the 3. Why all of a sudden here it was evening and morning, day the 6th? Now there's a rule. Whenever we have the prefix hey, which is the, that means the Torah is referring to a specific, defined something. Therefore, the sages extrapolate that when it says the 6th, it's talking about a specific 6. And these are the words of our sages. Hisna Kadosh Baruch Hu, God made a condition with creation. What's the condition? God said, if on the 6th of Sivan, that's when the Jews were at the foot of Mount Sinai and received the Torah. It said, if on the 6th, right? That's what the verse is talking about, a predefined 6th. If on the 6th of Sivan, the Jewish people will accept my Torah, you will exist. If they do not accept my Torah, this was all a failed experiment and you will not be existing. I'm going to revert back to the way it was before Genesis. Now, what are we hearing here? We're hearing here that from a very deep point of view, what took place at Mount Sinai on the 6th of Sivan, right? 3,329 years ago, was the fulfillment of the purpose and mission for which God created the universe. And that's why the universe's existence depends upon that 6th day of Sivan going right. Right? Now, let's understand here. To understand why the Jewish people saying we will do and we will hear, accepting the Torah, is the fulfillment of the purpose, mission, and desire that God had in creating the universe, we need to understand a little bit of what Kabbalah and Hasidus says about the process of creation. Here's an introduction of a word that many people who have gone to any Kabbalah class, tzimtzum. What is tzimtzum? Tzimtzum means contraction. Let's talk about that. What it means is that we are taught in Kabbalah, before the creation of the universe, Hayahu Ushmo Levad, there was He and His name alone. And in Kabbalah we say the word Shmo is the numerical value of Ratzon, which is will, which ultimately really means Or. He and His infinite light. That's all that existed before creation. He and His infinite light. Now, how did creation start? So we're taught that the bet of Bereshit represents Tzimtzum. Right? If you look at the bet, it looks like a one-way mirror. You can't see here. Whatever was here was stopped. It starts here. So this concept of Tzimtzum literally means that God contracted the expression of the infinite light. And by that, what did God do? He created a void of infinitism. Now, in this void, we can create a finite world. If you're going to have finite within infinite, you're not going to see it. It won't be existent. It's going to shatter. Thus, God first makes a tzimtzum, a contraction, pull back expression of the infinite light. Give me a void of the infinitism of expression, illumination. And in there, we're going to introduce what's called a kav, a ray of light. And that will create finite vessels. And then we'll have the light of life shine into those vessels.
Through the garments.
We'll talk about the garments and everything different. Right now, I just want to focus on one note so we can be very brief in understanding. But yes, you're right. There's the curtain, and there's the garment, and there's the round tzimtzum, and there's the square tzimtzum. It's all true. But let's just keep it simple right now so we can focus on why Torah is the fulfillment. Because the question is, why did God create a contraction? In order to have finite vessels. Why?
To manifest something spiritual and visible.
But why? Why do we need that? Everything existed. There's nothing new under the sun. So the answer that's brought down in the teachings of Chassidus is that the reason why God made a tzimtzum to allow the finite to have an identity, and then later the goal is not to separate the finite from the infinite. The goal is to have infinite light clothe itself within finite vessels. Why? Let's talk for a moment why. Let's just be logical. Because when you have finite, disconnected vessels, you have freedom of choice. Thus, what happens here is that God creates a void, disconnection, one-way mirror. You don't see that you are nothing more than an extension of His existence. And then what happens? I have a choice. To be or not to be. To believe or not to believe. To observe or not to observe. And then you freely choose. I want to draw God's infinite light into my being and into my realm of experience and into my universe. So the reason for the separation and the contraction and the disconnection is all why? Not to separate the finite from the infinite, but rather to create this amazing paradox, this beautiful impossibility of having finite vessels absorb infinite light. This is freedom of choice in its fulfillment. Freedom of choice is not that you have the right to choose against God. The gift of freedom of choice is that I was given the gift to freely choose God. That's beautiful. God doesn't need to be a dictator. He can be an elected, wanted, anointed, inaugurated king. That's what Shema Yisrael is all about.
Only through buffers.
Only through contraction. Only through having the disconnect. Only through having the tzimtzum, which I just like using the parable of a one-way mirror. Nothing changed from God's point of view. But when I look up, all I see is me. Look how far it goes. When I look up, I only see a God who created me and who will feed me. Again, He's my God. It's a whole different paradigm. Total disconnect. Finite vessels. Okay? Now that we understand this, we can understand what's going on here. What happened on the 6th day? What happened? The Torah. What is the Torah? The Torah is God's infinite light. What happened on the 6th day was that the finite vessels agreed to absorb and live in congruency with God's infinite light. However, we need to understand one more thing here. Everything, every creation, even the neshama, even the soul, as it manifests itself into a creation and descends into this world, is all touched by the tzimtzum. Even the neshama, peace of God, it's touched, it's affected, each in different levels. The only exception to the rule that exists on this universe, within this universe, that is primordial and was never touched or affected by contraction, tzimtzum, is God's Torah. God's Torah down here is exactly the Torah the way it is up there. Over here it manifests itself in laws, for example, animals. And over there, we know the famous quote from the verse of the prophets. He talks about the angels as Behema Rabbah, the great animals. The ox, the face of the ox, the face of the lion. But the Torah is the same Torah. Now we understand why the Torah is called the pure olive oil, which is the only fuel to be able to keep the flame of God alive with total consumption. There's nothing left of the oil. It is completely absorbed because it is pre-tzimtzum. If it's pre-tzimtzum, then it's truly infinite, and thus it is the perfect fuel for the infinite. Thus we say that Torah is the infinite wisdom of God. Thus we say that Torah is the infinite wisdom of God. Commandments is the infinite will of God. But it gets better. He in His wisdom is one. He in His will is one. That's a quote in Kabbalah. But it gets better than that. The first word of the Ten Commandments is Anochi. Anochi is a very unusual non-Hebrew term. for the word I. In Hebrew, it's ani. Right? What do you say at the end of your Shema? Ani Hashem Elokeichem emet. You don't say Anochi Hashem Elokeichem emet. So our sages say there's a secret here. The word Anochi, those 4 letters, serve as an acronym. Ana, Nafshit, Kitavit, Yahavit. I, God. Nafshit, my soul, i.e. my essence. Yahavit, in the writings, the Torah, Yahavit, I have given, I have placed. So now what are we talking about? We're talking about the Torah is not only the primordial infinite wisdom of God. It's not only the primordial infinite will of God. It is nafshit. The essence of God was placed into the Torah. And therefore we're taught when you take Torah, oti atem lochem. It is me, says God, that you are taking. Okay? So now that we understand that the Torah is the only primordial, untouched by tzimtzum existence in this universe, we now understand how the 6th day of Sivan is the fulfillment of the original desire, purpose, and mission of creation, of Genesis. Because the Torah manifests itself in what? In the finite human mind. What do mitzvahs manifest themselves in? They manifest themselves in the finite laws of nature, the finite physical objects, the finite human performance of a mitzvah. Thus, you see what's happening here? It's exactly what we originally set out to do, says God. The infinite within the finite. The infinite clothes itself within the finite. That is the original purpose and mission of the entire Genesis. Okay? Now we understand what the verse of Isaiah is saying. You see how the paradox is no more a paradox? When you're talking about the finite vessels of the Jewish people, you're talking about countable, no small number, the sands of the sea. But what is the purpose of this verse? Isaiah is telling us that you should know that with Torah and mitzvot, what are we doing? We have the uncountable clothed itself within the countable. We have the infinite will of God, the infinite wisdom of God, the essence of God within the finite human mind studying the Torah, within the finite world which is the fulfillment of the commandments of God. This is what Isaiah is talking about.
But he's also talking about in what level of Hakma you do it in. You have to have your intent. It's all about the intent.
That, my friend, is the beauty of it. You realize that you and I are studying Torah.
Right.
You realize Moses studied Torah.
Right.
Will you agree with me that there is an infinite gap between your studying Torah with me and Moses studying Torah? And yet both of us, we had the exact same experience on our own level. You are very right. The infinite wisdom of God housed itself within Moses' finite human mind, and it's housing itself within our mind. A total different story. But that's the story.
He always says that the more you do it, the more you get closer to the level of Hakma. You reach a heavy...
Absolutely, just like in the gym.
The mitzvah becomes more... It becomes more of a mitzvah. It's not like faking it. It's like doing it.
It's not more of a mitzvah. You're talking about something else. You're talking about more of a transparency. You put on a tefillin as a 13-year-old, and you put on tefillin as a 70-year-old scholar. You both did the exact same mitzvah. The amount of revelation and emotional experience, that's different. But the actual connection of an infinite light in a finite tefillin upon a finite hand, it's the same. Okay? Moses' intentions when he was praying is far different than my intentions. But the fact that we put on tefillin and say the words, that's just the fact. That's a physical fact. That's the Yom HaShishi. Okay? Now, I want to share with you. Leonard Cohen of blessed memory, right before he died, he composed, one of the songs he composed was called You Want It Darker. I want to read with you some lyrics in which he tells God, these are the lyrics, magnified, sanctified, be thy holy name. And then he goes on to say, you want it darker, Hineni, I am ready, my Lord. Powerful lyrics. from Leonard Cohen, actually right before he died. And by the way, so it is. It is exactly as those lyrics say. What we're going to study here now is that Torah and mitzvot is not the absolute fulfillment of the original mission. Why? Let's quote Leonard Cohen of blessed memory. You want it darker. Why do you want it darker? Magnified, sanctified, holy be thy name. Let's talk about this, okay? Torah and mitzvot, Torah and commandments are light by nature. And what happens? Being that they're light by nature, they give off products called light. The darkness that the Torah and mitzvah deals with is the absence of light. And thus Torah deals with it by telling us, introduce light. There won't be darkness.
So
However,
the more you submerge into darkness, the more you create light.
Not what I'm saying, but I like what you're saying. What we're saying here is, not the more you submerge into darkness, the more you submerge into light, the more you dispel darkness. That's what we're saying here right now. We're soon going to get to what you're saying. But Torah and mitzvahs doesn't do that. Torah and mitzvah doesn't tell you, delve into darkness. Quite the contrary. 365 prohibitions tell you, don't touch darkness.
It says don't be afraid of it.
That's a different story. But we're talking about not being afraid or not being afraid. We're talking about, what am I to do with this darkness? If the Torah can... No, that's not what the Torah says. The Torah doesn't tell you, I want you to take a pig. And I want you to make a shechita. And I want you to sprinkle its blood on the altar. And then I want you to make such a deep, intentional blessing. No, it doesn't say that. It tells you stay away from pig. For whatever reason, pig is a creation which comes from the three dark husks of darkness. Don't touch it. What he tells you is, deal with the holy, the pure, the neutral. That we can deal with. I want to tell you even more than that. You know what else he says?
Before I get lost,
Go ahead.
in them three things, is there darkness? You deal with the holy, the pure,
and the neutral. No darkness. Even the neutral is called in Kabbalah klipat noga, which is the transparent husk, which is called the husk of light. Light is reachable. But in something that is completely dark, non-transparent, 100% opaque, Torah tells you don't deal with it. True sitra, the full gamut, don't deal with it. Torah tells you not.
just do it.
How do you deal with that darkness? If Torah is telling me that you can't deal with it, what are we supposed to do with that darkness? And the answer is what? The answer is that the ultimate darkness that we deal with is only dealt with through the darkness of God. What does that mean, the darkness of God? So there's a verse in Tehillim. Yoshes Choshes Chsisre. Let me read it to you. He made darkness his hiding place about him as his booth. The darkness of water, thick clouds. That's a Kabbalistic reference to the ultimate Sitra Achra of the skies. So we have an issue here. On one hand, the only thing the Torah mitzvah tells me is 248 commandments, engage. Engage with what? The holy, the pure, the neutral. Stay away from the dark and the evil. Then what happens? The next thing that happens after that is that what? Oh, you want to know what about the evil? 365 prohibitions. What does that tell me? Disconnect, separate, abstinence. Don't engage. You should only engage in that which it's permissible to permeate with light. That which is absolutely impossible to connect with light, stay away. The word is, thou shalt not. That's all you can do. I have a desire to eat now. I'm walking in the street. All I see is Burger King. The price for a double Mac is about half the price of a single burger that's kosher. And I really want to eat it, and I say no. That's all you can do from a Torah perspective. Somehow when you said no, you gave a zest to the global negativity, but you didn't transform it. Evil remains evil. Darkness remains darkness. It just remains separated from within our midst. Now I ask of you, everything is God and God is everything. That means this darkness, who created it? There is no such thing as Satan versus God. Who is Satan if not but a piece of God, an emissary of God, commanded by God to create temptation for the sake of growth and meaning and preciousness? So if that be the case, what do you mean that there's nothing I can do with this other than separate myself from it? Is that all that darkness has to offer? This real definition of darkness, not the absence of light darkness. That which is a something called darkness. All I can do with that in my life is what? Stay away from it?
If you know.
And what happens if I slip?
You know the difference of it.
Well, let's say you know the difference.
If you're ignorant of it, it's a whole different thing.
Ignorance is never an excuse. But we'll talk about the difference between unintentional and intentional later. For right now, I want to know, and what happens if I did slip? And what happens if I didn't just slip with the lack of connecting to light? I slipped into a something called darkness. What do I do now? What do I do now? From the Torah perspective, there's nothing you can do. Do you know that from the Torah perspective, you can only do teshuvah for an unintentional sin? We'll talk about that soon. Unintentional sin is not true darkness. Unintentional sin is a darkness which is the absence of light. An intentional sin, what did we say before? Repel, despise. That's a different story. So, now let's talk about this. That means that within God, there is the essence darkness of God, and there's the infinite light of God. What is the difference? When we talk about the light of God, what are we talking about? We're talking about Hu Ushmo, He and His name, He and His infinite light. Blessed be He. Then when we talk about the darkness of God, what are we talking about? We're talking about the essence that defies any form and shape and description, and thus it defies revelation. God expresses itself in light. Let me say it to you in another way. The essence of light, the essence of God, is no closer to light than it is to darkness. Light has a definition. Light has a value system. That which is greater light, infinite, finite, not so light, opaque, a little opaque, a lot opaque, 100% opaque. But when we talk about the definition of the essence, that which is, when we talk about God is everything and everything is God, that means absolute evil and darkness is God. I want to throw this out there just to shake up some feathers. Who created Hitler?
God.
Who gave Hitler life?
God.
Who was actually sustaining Hitler while he was doing what he was doing in Mach Shemoy?
God.
And I just say God is everything and everything is God? Wow. You know what that sentence, I don't want to say the sentence, but you know what that means when we talk about Hitler? God is, and blank is God. That cannot come from the light of God. The light of God is defined by light and only produces light. Absolute evil darkness can only come from the essence of God. Remember what I told you before? Light is formation. That comes from the infinite light. Darkness is a creation, ex nihilo. Total different bolo wax. We need to get further and understand this because this is not easy to understand.
Are we getting into a godly realm, or now we could be talking about the Yetzirah, the Yetzirah, we could be talking about the Ra.
Well, in the Yetzirah, there's two different levels.
We could be talking about a Sadi.
Let's keep it simple, my friend. Let's just keep it very simple. The Yetzirah told you not to go to shul today.
First thing.
That's the absence of light.
That's absolutely right.
The Yetzirah, the evil inclination, told some evil person to blow up things in Manchester and kill kids and adults. You understand that that's a different Yetzirah? You understand one is the absence of light and one is absolute, complete evil and darkness. Now, what does the Torah want me to do with such an evil? What am I supposed to do with it? If it exists, it is an existence of God. For nothing but God exists. God is everything and everything is God. The Torah cannot tell me what to do, other than to tell me disconnect. What does the Talmud tell us? The Talmud tells us. It says when you see a sota, when you see a woman that misbehaved, what should you do? When you see a darkness that comes from the absence of light, you should take upon yourself to become a Nazir. Become holier. give more light, add light. That's all the Torah can tell me to do. The Torah can never tell me to bring a sacrifice out of a pig. By the way, parenthetically speaking, and I want to just keep on moving today, what was the problem that Samuel had with King Saul? King Saul brought back the livestock of Amalek, the embodiment of absolute evil. And he told Samuel, what greater sacrifice can we give God than to take this and turn it into sacrifice? And what did Samuel tell him? You lost your kingdom. He ripped his cloak. And what did he tell him? He told him the famous words, Halo shemua tov mezevach tov. Is not listening better than bringing sacrifices? Because in the laws of the infinite light, there is nothing that could be done with the products and the byproducts of Amalek, other than abnegation, eradication.
There was a requirement not to do it.
Correct. That's why. Where did the requirement come from? The Torah. Why did the Torah give that requirement? Because the Torah can only deal with light and anything that has the slightest connection with light. Give me some connection, we'll deal with it. But absolute darkness, sorry, out of the boundaries of Torah, because Torah is light. Okay?
Like Amalek, same thing.
Yes, exactly. All the same. Okay? Now, the question is, what do we do with real darkness? What do we do with absolute darkness? We've done things in our life. I shouldn't make it as a general thing. But I can say that there are things in my life that does not fit into just the absence of light. What do I do with those sins? The only answer is teshuvah. Teshuvah takes us where Torah cannot take us. Now I want to be very clear, because you asked me, what does the Torah say about teshuvah? Just that you know, what does the Torah say about teshuvah? The Torah just deals with unintentional sins. You bring a korban chatas. If you made a mistake and you desecrated the Shabbat unintentionally, either because you didn't know it was Shabbat, or you didn't know this was prohibited, or you were under a state of intoxication, whatever it was, then you can bring a sacrifice. However, someone who intentionally, willfully rebels, I know it's Shabbos, and I was brought up that Shabbos is a real reality in my home, but I'm going to break that, I'm going to rebel. You can't bring a sacrifice. The Torah has nothing it can do for you. Absolutely nothing.
And what would be an example of a sacrifice?
Well, in the times of the Holy Temple, I'm talking about the old-fashioned.
Yeah,
The whole 9 yards. Today it's different.
How do you do it
Today it's a spiritual experience, which is a total different class. The Rebbe talked about it in 1952.
Listen, we all make mistakes today.
Absolutely.
So how do you-
Absolutely.
What's an easy way to fix it?
Well, we'll talk about that afterwards. Right now, that's a 1952 beautiful teaching of the Rebbe. He really dissects what is the spiritual manifestation that you and I today can bring sacrifices. We can't bring physical sacrifices. But let's go further. To understand what's the difference between teshuvah and Torah mitzvot, we're going to have to go into what exactly does Torah mitzvot accomplish. So here's an interesting concept. We're taught on a mystical level that the commandments are called the seeds of God. And where did God plant these seeds? Within what the prophet calls Eretz Chayfetz, the desired land of God. What is that? It's not what is that, it's who is that? It's you and me. So God planted his seeds within you and me. And why do you plant seeds? To bring produce. That means that Torah and mitzvot brings produce. Now we need to understand, how does this work? So number one, you should know that the Talmud says, no one plants one measurement, one handful of seeds in order to get one handful of produce. You plant one handful of seeds to get a whole slew of produce. So too you should know with the commandments. These commandments, when we do commandments, it's not we did a action, we get back one finite light. The produce of the seeds of God, i.e., doing commandments, physical finite commandments, is in order to get the infinite produce. Bring the infinite light into this world. Now, here's a kicker. What is the secret? How does one seed bring forth the infinite? It does. Because one seed grows a tree, on that tree there's fruit, those fruits have seeds, it's infinite. How does that happen? So here's an interesting secret. According to Kabbalah and Hasidus, you should know that the power of reproduction does not lie within the seed. It lies within the earth. Because if you go to Genesis, what does it say? And God told the earth, give forth. So what's the job of the seed? If you have the earth, what do you need a seed? The job of the seed is to arouse in the depths of the earth. There's that words of God giving it the power to give forth produce. But the seed arouses, brings forth into a specific spot, and gives forth a specific product. An orange seed is going to grow orange trees and not apple trees. So there's three things here, just to be quick. Number one, it has to arouse. The earth by itself doesn't just have babies. You need a seed to arouse it. Bring it up. God put it in you. Come on, let's get it out of you. And on the other hand, here. You plant the seed here, it's not going to grow there. And third of all, the product should be within lieu of the seed. An orange seed, an orange tree. Now let me ask you the million-dollar question. How does a seed arouse the infinite power of God's declaration to the earth that you will reproduce? Exactly.
What was it?
The answer is it's based on the scientific fact that the seed decomposes. Mystically speaking, that ultimate humility of decomposition is what arouses the infinite power of the earth. Now let's go back to talk about mitzvot. How does mitzvot, God's seed in me, how does it produce infinite light within finite vessels? How does it arouse that power? And the answer is humility. The humility of the children of Israel when they perform mitzvot is what arouses the produce of infinite light into this physical world. Now, let's talk about this humility. What is this humility? So you should know that in the world of Kabbalah, there's two levels of humility. One humility is called Bitul Hayesh, and one humility is called Bitul HaMetzias. Let's translate that. The humility of the Yesh, the something, ego. Then there is the Bitul HaMetzias, which is the humility of existence. Now, the humility of something is not the concentration, meditation, and total experience of that my existence is a nothingness. No. All it's saying is my ego is a nothingness. Let me share with you how it's said in other words in Kabbalah. There's Ein Od, nothing else, then there's nothing else besides him. Let's talk about this practically. There's one way of thinking that says like this. Without God, I am nothing. But God did create me to be a something. Thus, with God's creating me, I am a something. In other words, there's a dual identity. There's God, there's I, and as long as I am connected to God, I can remain I am I. Then there's a higher existence. The higher existence of humility of my existence, not my ego, which brings me into the higher unification. The lower unification says that there is two, but me has to be connected in order for me to be me. I disconnect, poof, I'm gone. But as long as I'm connected, there's him and there's me. Capital H and little I. What happens when you talk about the higher level of humility? The higher level of humility doesn't just say that, who am I to have an ego? I'm a nobody without God. I'm a nobody without God. What's there to be ego about? Not that I'm pushing here, I know there are Democrats and Republicans, but I like Rush Limbaugh's line, with talent on loan from God. It's not my talent. Whatever I have is on loan from God. So there's nothing to be ego, but I am I. I am something. God created me to be something. Then there's the higher humility that my existence is nothing. How can my existence be nothing? If you have 9 men and I walk in there, do you have a minion? I got to be a something. If not, you couldn't count me. You can't count nothing as part of a minion. So I'm a something. What does that mean? I'll tell you what it means. It means that when we realize that my very existence is what? The consciousness of God is everything and everything is God. If God is everything and everything is God, there is no two identities that are unified. There's only one identity. Which identity? God is everything. Total different level of humility. Now we need to go further.
So that means that we don't exist.
It means that the only thing that does exist is God.
Okay.
Imagine. You remember I told you about the two-way mirror? That's how I like playing with contraction, calling it the two-way mirror. Let's go from the window side of the mirror. All you see is what? God is everything. The only time that you think there's a me that has to be connected to God is when I look into the mirror. Even when I look into the mirror, I know that I gotta get my existence from somewhere. Okay, so I have no ego. I'm not a pharaoh. Who is God that I shall listen to him? I made this forest. It's my forest. I didn't make the forest. It's God's forest. I didn't make me. God made me. But God made me. So me is me. But I have to stay connected to God. But when you look from the other side of the one-way mirror, you look from the window side, that's the higher unification. There is no me. When you look from the window side, all you see is one thing. God is everything. You don't see a cutoff of God and I.
There's no free choice.
That's the higher level.
And that time there's no free choice. Because you see everything is good.
So you ask a good question, which is something that he started dabbling a moment ago. What's a tzaddik's Yetzer Hara? A Benini has the Yetzer Hara. What's the purpose of a tzaddik?
You know, that's
What's the purpose of a tzaddik doing mitzvahs? If mitzvahs is all about freedom of choice, that's a different story, a different class. Right now, let's focus on this one issue. Two levels of humility. Now let's understand this. What is the difference of these two humilities? In order for me to allow the seeds of God, what is the seeds of God? His commandments. In order for me to allow the seeds of God through me, his desired land, to give the infinite produce of bringing the infinite life into the finite vessels, all I need is the lower humility. All I need is to get my ego out of the way. There's an interesting teaching. Unification is the purpose of humility. There's no reason to be humble just for the sake of being humble. Why am I humble? Because I'm humble. I'm a nobody. I'm a nobody. No, the reason why I want to say that I'm a nobody is if I'm a nobody, what am I? I am his. So it's all about unification. What's the secret of unification? So let me tell you the bottom rule of unification. The bottom rule of unification comes from a statement in the Talmud. The Talmud says, Ein ani v'hu. It's talking about slandering. It's talking about Lashon Hara. And it says that he who slanders, it says the sages call God, I and him cannot live together. We can't dwell together. How does it know? Because it brings a verse. And the verse says a couple of things. It says that the slanderer, I will not suffer, I won't tolerate, I won't live with him. But then it goes on to saying, the haughty eye, the proud. Thus the Talmud finishes with two words. V'yesh oimrim. The Talmud starts off by saying this is talking about the person who says Lashon Hara. But then it says V'yesh oimrim. There are those that say that this is not only talking about he who speaks gossip. It's talking about he who has an ego issue. God says I and he cannot coexist. I want to give you a simple example how I'm preparing this class, I'm looking for. So this is what I came up with. God and ego are two like poles of a magnet. You ever try to push two like poles together? Impossible. What do you have to do? One has to turn around. God ain't turning around. We have to turn around. Our ego is a like pole to God's existence and we won't live together. Ein ani v'hu yachol ladu b'yachad. So what's the purpose of humility? To get that out of the way. What's the purpose of getting that out of the way? That it should be, I do live with God. I do have in my existence and my consciousness that the universe and God is one. God is one with me. That's the purpose here. And by letting that happen, what happens then? Then through me, i.e., quote the verse, Eretz Chayfetz, the desired land of God, the seed is going to give the infinite produce, the infinite light. Okay? Now, let's go by to the next thing. Not only does Torah give us, and I mentioned this before, I just want to say it again because now we're going to go into the next level. Please remember there's a very big difference between the teshuvah that the Torah gives us atonement for and what the Torah doesn't give us atonement for. There's a very interesting teaching that God asked wisdom, what should I do to he who sins? And wisdom answered, the verse says that wisdom will give life to its master. Once a person disconnects with wisdom, i.e. does foolish things, he has to die. God asked the Torah, and what do you say I should do with the sinner? And the Torah said, if it's unintentional, let him be forgiven. And God said, and what's if it's intentional? And the Torah said, he has to die. And then God asked, the Holy One, blessed be he. I mean, interesting what we're saying here. What do you say? And he said, let him repent. Let him return and live. That means there's a level of teshuvah that the Torah embraces. And the only level it embraces is with unintentional sins. Unintentional sins is not absolute something called darkness. It's the absence of light. It's unintentional. It's the absence of light. What happens with the intentional sins? The intentional sins is the embodiment of that verse I quoted from last week's Torah portion. You will despise. You will rebel. That's not unintentional. Torah can't do anything there. So let's talk about what teshuvah is. Okay? The story of doing teshuvah for the intentional sin. And we're finishing up. So I want to take you to addiction recovery. Yes, I know, I talk about addiction recovery a lot. In addiction recovery, there's something called the Step 7 prayer. What is a Step 7 prayer? This is how it goes. It begins with, I'm quoting, my Creator, I am now willing for you to have all of me, good and bad. You would be amazed how many people, desperate for recovery, knowing that you can't cut corners with the steps, they come to a dead end with those words. What do you mean good and bad? How can you tell God that I have good and bad and I'm not ready for you to have my good and my bad? I have to hide my bad. I have to deny my bad. For if I have bad, God won't have me. What is this prayer? And yet, what does the Step 7 prayer say? It says precisely, right? Do you know what the next words after that is? Let me share with you. Remove from me every single defect of character. That is so interesting. Before I can ask God and allow God to remove from me all defects of character, I have to first tell God, I have good, I have bad, and I'm ready for you to have all of me, good and bad. It's a problem for a lot of people. But here's what's going on. Let me share with you what's going on. If I have a God who can only have good and light, and is defined only by good and light, then that God cannot help me when I've slipped into absolute evil and darkness. It just can't. That God can only tell me, bring light into your life. But God, this isn't a question of the absence of light. This is real. This is a cancerous tumor of a defect in my character. This is real darkness. This is not a vitamin deficiency. God says, okay, so if it was done unintentionally, it's still considered neutral. It's the husk of light. Unintentionally, I can still get through you, and I can still have you and save you. You tell God, no, sorry, this was intentional. I robbed to do this. I stole. I did this. I know exactly what I was doing. I kept on promising I'll never do it again. And then I just went and did it again. Whoa. The God of light says, sorry, my friend. So when I say God, Creator, right? That was the words. My Creator, I am now willing for you to have all of me, good and bad. What am I talking about? I must be talking to a God who is willing to embrace my bad, my absolute evil, vicious, something called bad. Not the absence of being a mensch. There's one person who's not a mensch. There's another person who's not just not a mensch. He's evil. There are times in our lives where we didn't just behave as not a mensch. We intentionally did harm. What do I do with that? For that, I've got to do teshuvah. I've got to reach the ultimate humility so that I can connect not with the God of light, but I can connect with the God as everything. And when I say everything, I mean absolutely everything, including evil. I need to connect to the God who created evil, who sustains evil, and can thus transform evil. If I'm still too ashamed to deal with my evil because I think that if God finds out about this, I'm kicked out of his pool, that's a problem.
You already knows.
Exactly. He knows.
We're soon going to see. Not only does he know, were you alive when you sinned?
Yes.
Who's the only one who gives you life?
Go.
Of course he knows. He was there with you. We'll soon see that. But the point I'm trying to say here is that if I can only deal with the God of light, and I can only deal with the God who will have my goodness, he'll have my absence of goodness, but he won't be willing to take my good and my bad, and thus I'm not willing to have him know that I have bad. I'm not willing to have him take my bad. Thus I'm talking to a God who cannot deal with my evil, cannot transform my evil. And that's why the humility of the absolute teshuvah that lies in the step 7 prayer is for me to be able to find the essence of God, the dark essence of God. What happens when I find the dark essence of God? What I then deal with is the dark essence of my soul. And from that dark essence of my soul, which lies embedded within the darkness of my selfless heart, I can do absolute teshuvah. I don't have to no more hide or be embarrassed of my past, but rather now that I've touched the essence darkness of God, and through humility I've connected to the essence darkness of my soul and the true emptiness and darkness of my heart, thus I can now use that which was unfathomable to actually be of service to God. And thus you have time and time again recovered addicts becoming sponsors, because a non-addict doctor and psychiatrist and psychologist will not be able to get through to an addict. What makes a sponsor is that he is crazy enough to be a sponsor. And the sponsor says, yeah, you've been where I was. You've connected with a God who loved you even after you did that? You've connected with a God who's taken that from you and loves you and connects with you and allows you to live as a sober, recovered human being? Share with me that God. That's what teshuvah does. Torah and mitzvahs cannot do that. Because Torah and mitzvahs by definition are light and deal only with light. And the only darkness they deal with is the absence of light. And the way to deal with it is say, bring in light. But to be able to truly transform a something called darkness, you need to deal with the essence darkness of God. The only way to deal with the essence darkness of God is to connect with the essence darkness of your soul. The only way to get to the essence darkness of your soul is to totally smash the ego. Not only the ego of I'm a something, but the ego that thinks that I'm any existence other than God is everything. Okay, let's close it up. In closing, to make this lecture truly practical, I will sum it up in one sentence. That's all I have to say for this whole lecture. One sentence. People, we need to get over ourselves. That's all I want to say. That's the difference of true humility. Let's talk about it. We need to be able to laugh at ourselves, even at the most shameful parts of ourselves and of the most shameful acts of our past. You ever see two recovering alcoholics talk? They talk about the hurricane and the tornado that they had in their past with laughter. Oh my God, you remember when I did that? And I was arrested and I this and that. They can laugh at it. They're not taking themselves so serious. Shh, don't let God hear. He'll never love me if he finds out. They laugh at themselves. They have a total different level of God. I want to share with you how, why, how do we laugh at ourselves? I'll tell you. By having a relationship with an unconditional God of essence darkness who is always with us and is always waiting us to turn around and face Him. I want to close it up with this, my friend. How many of you people are aware of a poem called Footprints? Okay, so you can look it up. Basically, Footprints is a poem. It's talking about a guy who at the end of his life turns to God, and he looks back and he sees in the beach sands of life, there's two sets of footprints, his and God's. But then as he pays more careful attention, he notices in the darkest times of his life, when he was really hurting financially, healthy, family, relationship, everything, he sees there's only one set of footprints. And he turns to God and he says, God, where were you in my hardest times? And God says, Yingala, my child, that one set of footprints you see are mine. I was carrying you. That's the poem called Footprints. But now I want to ask you to dare to be brave. In the poem, the dark times reflect suffering times. After this class, I want you to redefine that poem. Do you know when the person thinks that there's only one set of footprints and it's one that's his and God has left him? When he's doing the darkest, shameful sins. Now, the intentional sins. Of course God's not with me. Of course I was alone. I can't even blame God. If I was God, I wouldn't either want to be with me when I was like that. Now hear what God says. My child, when you were doing those intentionally rebellious, horrific things, that was my footprints. I was carrying you then. That's the God that we can do teshuvah to. That's the God that can transform that shameful, despicable me into the greatest moments of light. And thus the Talmud says, and with this we close, the power of teshuvah is shezdonot nasalok izachiot. The worst intentional sins become the most brilliant merits. Thank you.